Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the Eritrean invasion of Tigray and the civil war in the former state of Ethiopia. Now, before I get into what is happening on the ground and a look at why what is happening on the ground, I think we first have to look at how we got here. And we have to look at the decision-making processes of the tin pot dictator Abiy Ahmed of the former state of Ethiopia, who nestled up to the despotic regime of Isaias Afwerki in Eritrea. So first, let's look at the definition of a tin pot dictator. And that would be an autocratic ruler with little political credibility, typically having delusions of grandeur. So why do I call the Abiy Ahmed regime a tin pot dictatorship? Well, private property rights have been eliminated. Rule of law and due process, for all intents and purposes, have been eliminated. And it is basically rule by decree with some other elements of the power brokers in the former state of Ethiopia, providing the decision-making processes in this hideous situation that is occurring, and started back with Abiy Ahmed's decision-making processes back in 2018, once he took power. And then obviously culminating in the catastrophic decision-making process of the quote-unquote law enforcement operation in conjunction with an external state actor, meaning the despotic regime of Eritrea, into the Tigray region. So again, I question the very legitimacy of the current so-called Ethiopian state under Abiy Ahmed. And I think a lot of people would agree with me as well. The problem is, if you disagree with Abiy Ahmed, you are then labeled a TPLF supporter, and your property is confiscated, or much worse, thrown in jail, or quietly assassinated. But here we are now with a new round of invasions into the Tigray region by Abiy Ahmed, the tin pot dictator of the former state of Ethiopia, and the despotic regime of Isaias Afwerki's Eritrea. So as we look what's happening right now, we have received information that between 20 and quite possibly up to 50,000 members of the Tigrayan Defense Forces have reportedly taken to the hills, much like what occurred back in the unsuccessful occupation of the Tigray region of 2021. So let's look real quickly at kind of what's happening right now, and let's look at the three choices, really, that the Tigray region had in the run-up to this war, and where we're at right now in terms of how they're looking to fight this conflict. Well, the first option would have been a direct Tigray Defense Force invasion of the former state of Ethiopia. Option one. Now, the problem with that is because of the despotic regime of Eritrea and its ability to then launch a possible counter-invasion into the Tigray region, or vice versa, if the Tigrayan Defense Forces would have moved into Eritrea, obviously the possibility of the Abiy Ahmed regime moving into Tigray was omnipresent. So very, very difficult, and that was something that I would have to say would be ruled out. The second option that the Tigray region had was a classical conventional defense, where it would utilize the cities as defensive redoubts. Ultimately, would culminate in the destruction of many of these cities. Cities such as Shire, cities such as Axum, Adwa, would have been destroyed or would be destroyed by the much more heavily armed armies of Eritrea, with the supporting Abiy Ahmed Air Force. So that was option 2. Option 3 for the Tigray region would be a try and true method that occurred back in 2021. That would be resisting in some of these cities, but not to the extent where these cities are reduced and destroyed, conducting holding operations while the main force of the Tigrayan Defense Forces takes to the hills, takes to the Tenbian region, this vast area to the south and east of the B30 highway. We know from the past conflict in 2021, it was a very effective strategy. It eventually led to the complete removal of Eritrean army forces, of Abiy loyalist forces, Amharan regional militia forces from the Tigray region. It was a successful counter-campaign to that invasion, and it worked. It also prevented the destruction of the Tigrayan cities, which would, under the current situation, be very, very difficult to rebuild. So that's where we sit right now. It would appear, with the movement of 20 to 50,000 of these Tigrayan fighters, some of the best trained units in the Tigrayan armed forces, being moved into this hill country to come back after the Eritrean army has spread itself very thin. The Abiy loyalist forces, after they have spread themselves very thin, to launch said counterattacks, just like what was done in 2021. It is very apparent that looks to be the strategy of the Tigrayan Defense Forces at this point. I see a lot of talk and discussion that because of the possible fall of some of these cities along the B30 highway, that this is it, hang it up, the Tigray Defense Forces have been defeated, they should capitulate, what have you. But you have to remember the same thing occurred in 2021, and you have to ask yourself, is the Tigrayan Defense Forces being defeated in the field, or is there a method to what they are doing? Is there a strategy much like the very successful strategy that occurred in 2021? Remember the 2021 counteroffensive, when they came out of the Tenbian and went after some of these isolated Eritrean army units, Abiy loyalist forces spread throughout the Tigray region, culminating in the Tigrayan Defense Forces taking 10,000 Abiy loyalist prisoners of war, and the eviction of those forces from the Tigray region. So as we watch what is happening on the ground, I would say hit the pause button in terms of irrational exuberance. Let's say if you are a supporter of the Eritrean army, if you're a supporter of the Abiy loyalist army, hit the pause button. Because again, remember Operation Alula. Remember 2021. 2021. And then ask yourself, is the same incompetent decision-making processes that resulted in this conflict continuing to be made by Abiy Ahmed and Isaias Afwerki? And the answer to that is absolutely. Is it possible that the Eritrean military, the Abiy loyalist forces, are doing exactly what the Tigrayan Defense Forces want them to do? And some of you say, well, that's ridiculous. They're giving up whole cities. The same thing happened in 2021, and then look at the result. So we're watching things very closely in Adwa. We're watching things very closely in Adigrat. And then obviously, with whatever happens in those cities, obviously we will see what happens next if those forces decide to turn south towards Mekelle. If the Abiy loyalist forces in the south decide to continue moving north. Are they moving to victory? Or are they moving into ultimate defeat, the same as 2021? You decide. Ultimately, we will find out. I hope everybody has a good evening, and we will have more soon. Good night.